artists around the world. Teaching artists around the world. Artists around the world. Teaching artists around the world. We are joined here in our visiting artist talk by the wonderful Marisa Jahn. I'm going to do a formal intro. Artist, filmmaker, transmedia producer of Ecuadorian and Chinese descent. Marisa Morán Jahn's work redistributes power, quote, exemplifying the possibilities of art as social practice, unquote, ArtForum. Jahn introduces a trickster-like humor into public spaces and discourses, and yet it is a humor edged with political potency. Her public artwork, civic media, tools, films, architectural, urban scale collaborations have been supported by New York Times, BBC, PBS, Wall Street Journal, LA Times, basically all the fake news. I'm joking. Sorry, I'm pulling Trumpisms in there. Hyperallergic, Univision Global. My God, look at this. Received grants and awards from NEA, Rockefeller, Brave Capital, Open Society, Tribeca Film Festival, Anonymous Was a Woman, and more. I also happen to have known Marisa for a bazillion years, back in our more youthful times in Berkeley, California. And it is totally a pleasure and an honor to welcome you to our online global community called the Alternative Art School. Welcome, Marisa.
Thank you. And so I have, there are many ways to pronounce my various names, which is Marisa, John. Some people, like in the art world, a lot of times people say Jan because they are more familiar with the German, but it actually comes from a German name, Chang, which is a Chinese version, which was then, my family Germanicized it just to avoid racial discrimination in Texas, where I grew up. So you might hear my name pronounced Marisa Morán Jahn.
Marisa Morán Jahn.
Yes.
All right.
So I'm going to share screen. And most of these bits are on my website, so like the videos. So I will show some snippets. And my work scales across medium. So from works on paper to, there's a lag. Oh, this guy, I like this guy. To civic scale and architectural projects. This is a pavilion that I designed with Rafi Seagal, who's an architect in Mexico City. And it is sited in the first public park of the Americas. And it's sited in a way that it kind of looks towards the rest of the park. And so it's kind of affirming that civic space. And it's the kind of thing where immediately people started making it their own, which I love, making artwork where people just take over and it becomes theirs. So, these people in the middle are reading their coffee. There was an earthquake. It's where everyone kind of naturally gravitated to during the earthquake, because it was like well lit and, offers a place to sit. And the structure is made from both it's perforated paper called papel picado, which comes from this Mesoamerican and Asian craft tradition of perforating the paper, in which the holes are said to let the past come through. And then there's this question that I think is interesting, of what pasts do you want to come through, and how do you open those? Aberturas is like a aperture, like a passage or opening that, in a camera you can control the aperture. So what and how much do you let come through? And the other material that's in dialogue with the paper is Mexico City's first roller coaster, and which had to be taken down for safety reasons. And so, we were explaining this project to the policewoman who was on patrol when we were installing it. And when we explained that it came from this roller coaster, she immediately hugged the structure, because she had, like many people in Mexico City do, had this nostalgic relationship where she went to this roller coaster as, you know, with her father as a kid kind of thing. And so I really love working with charismatic objects. And so as a different example is Biblu Bandido, which is actually, well, the context is this. This community invited me to create and help invigorate their literacy project. And they said, you have to come. We have the largest library in northern Honduras. And when I got there, it was one bookshelf low. So this is what we created and how we got the workshop that we made to stick. So this masked villain who eats stories, we all love a good story, but this guy eats them. And again, he pesters little kids until they write and offer him stories that they've written until his insatiable appetite is nourished. This character, I'm happy to say he is bigger than Santa Claus in Honduras. And different communities have adopted this character. He went to, so I am never playing Biblu Bandido. I always ask the communities to play that I'm working with, and who really have taken this project and it still continues on its own in Central America without my involvement at all. And they always play the characters, and I never want to play it myself because I want people to adapt and know how to kind of do this, feel this transformational process themselves and adapt it. So Biblu Bandido has been an important and critical person in my life and continues to be that. And so I think that this, I'm always interested in masks and rituals and transformation, individual and cultural transformations. I'm going to share with you this different project and how it transformed me. I'll just go back a second.
One day, as I was filing some paperwork, I came across my medical record. Inside was information about my copper IUD, and I started wondering about this piece of technology that's in my very own snatch. So I began researching who invented the copper IUD, its history, its use, how many people have IUDs, and where did the copper in my snatch come from? I needed to know what's at stake.
Okay. So I've really, what happened was I've workshopped this project and I've just done so many different iterations. And I realized what happened was I was teaching this course at MIT for a couple of years on transmedia and mineral extraction, specifically on copper. And then I was asked to do this talk at Creative Time, which NATO saw the first kind of iteration. And I realized, I can't talk about mineral extraction like I do to my class, like my students. And I needed something that was more, it was an opportunity to kind of harness and think about all of the wonderful, fun stuff that the art world in the art community does really well. And so I transformed onto stage into Aphrodite, the goddess of love and copper. And there in the version that NATO saw, I am breaking up with the audience for abusing my abundance for the past 10,000 years. And in a recent version at WNYC's Green Stage, we've already broken up, me and the audience, and I am thanking you for coming back to the conversation because I think there was a misunderstanding and I think there might be a way to patch things up despite the fact that you've been abusing my abundance. And it's like the character is a way for me to address our mineral dependencies and the way that, to use Catherine Yusuf's words, that extraction plays a disproportionate toll on, well, it's the body burdens of mineral extraction is disproportionately absorbed by women and children in the global south. So a different kind of charismatic object or thing is, I've been recently thinking about these animal sculptures, which were built in the 1930s across the United States in public housing buildings and were designed by WPA era artists. And this is a time when public housing, which was seen as a reward for the working poor, and were well designed. So, and this is also a really fascinating moment because it's when, as Michael Denning points out, this is a moment in American history where artists, architects, and designers are proudly, and it's actually led by second generation, quote, ethnic immigrants, which is like German, Italian, Irish, are proudly identifying as contributing, and they're outwardly looking, contributing to strengthening the social fabric. So to me, this is a fascinating moment. And I love that the animal sculptures, when you're talking with people, it instantly captures the imagination of kids who imagine themselves like talking to these creatures, and they all have these, like these recollections of climbing to the top. And also it captures the recollections of the public housing residents who have grown up with these sculptures. So public housing is a recent kind of through line in the work that I do, because it really intersects the groups that I work with, which are primarily low-wage workers, new immigrant families, and women and children. And for about 12 years, I have developed a body of work with, and for domestic workers, as well as domestic employers. And it stems from my own thinking about care for my son and my grandmother, also looking ahead to the needs of my parents who are first generation immigrants and don't have a safety net. And along the way, I've created different policy toolkits, mobile vehicles, and really it's like that unpack in public spaces, and it's meeting domestic workers where they're at to create both worker-facing tools as well as tools that meet the needs of domestic employers. So someone who employs a caregiver to take care of their kid. And I thought that this project had culminated and finished in after we made this PBS film, which is also available on YouTube. It's online. It's a 24-minute miniseries. And then what happened was I was up for this art prize, and they said they said, we would like to give you money to do something that is part and related to this project, but is a new extension. And I thought it was like, to me, a van was pretty big and 25,000 miles is pretty big. And I was like, what would be bigger? So then I was thinking about the many ways in which housing had entered the conversation, not only for domestic workers and the economic precarity that they face, but also domestic employers. So, like specifically older and disabled individuals are more likely to be have housing precarity and have difficult kind of rent situations. So in my mind, I was like, well, how is it that you can surface what I call the plur economies, like all the different many ways and economies in which we are already participating, care swaps, paid labor force, unpaid family members and so forth. And really care is just one of the sectors, right? If you think about food, there's many ways in which we have soup swaps and so forth, or, we're cooking for somebody else, or maybe we're buying. So this, like the totality of our daily needs, how do you surface those and make those visible so to properly value and appraise them? The word plur economy was something that I've been using in my work with a frequent collaborator, Rafi Segal, with whom I authored this book, Design and Solidarity. And we write about the Care Force journey, as well as a few other projects. This question about housing, like what I was going to do for this art prize, and thinking about like housing, how to surface the different kinds of economies on a civic and architectural scale. And I was thinking about this word oikos, which actually it's Heidegger reminds us that it comes from the Greek word for home, and like home economics, and like the organization, the economy starts with the maintenance of the home. And I was thinking about Dolores Hayden's writing about 19th century material feminists who, for in the early 1800s through the mid 1930s, we're coming up with really interesting, innovative ways to think about how to collectivize and share care and housing, from, Ellen Swallow Richards, who came up with the word home economics and was creating different kinds of things, to Marie Howland, who was thinking about like childcare facilities, and then through on an urban scale. And, and there's specific reasons why this moment in history has not prevailed. Part of it is because of the Red Scare in the 1930s and then the 50s, and then which led to the development and creation of single-family nuclear homes. And then the other reason is that in the 1950s, this is when the American government shifted its funding from like public housing, urban core or urban infrastructures, to building suburban homes. And they were being lobbied by developers and the car industry, who served to gain from the suburbanization of America and building these highways. So this is the moment that, like, the 1930s is a decisive blow for this movement of 19th century material feminists and other people who are collectivizing things in life that we need, that we then like remembered in the pandemic that we needed. So, this question of how do you design for social, we've inherited this legacy, if you think about our housing stock, of how we have designed for social isolation, racial segregation, which is really intertwined with how we build homes and public housing, and economic stratification, which we can quantify and was surfaced during the pandemic in terms of the public, individual and public health risks. And, this is like, we're feeling this intensity of the care crisis by Americans who have no long-term savings, can't afford care, and the economic precarity in caregivers. If you're a parent, it's really, you really acutely face the labor shortages and precarity, because it's really hard to find a caregiver. So, if you're rethinking things fundamentally, how do you bank and design to improve upon the social determinants of health? To help think through this question, I turned to my collaborator, Rafi Segal, and we also turned to a developer in urban planning, Urs Valerie, who is a social justice real estate developer, whose mother was a domestic worker. So he really keenly got these questions at hand. And we have developed this project called Care House, which we say is the US's first care-based co-housing project. The first building is in Baltimore. And our mission is to provide quality care in homes for older and disabled adults, provide quality jobs and homes for caregivers, because if you haven't solved for caregiver turnaround, then you have no care. And this is like the key problem in the caregiving industry, is to solve for the turnover of caregivers, to integrate art and insist that art is a part of our well-being. And the fourth, which somehow got left off here, maybe it's a surprise, will come in a surprise, is to think about social integration and urban integration, and development without displacement. So we will not go into details about talking about the ways in which, and this is really Ernst's perspective, of choosing a site that is helping to reinvest in this historically disinvested neighborhood, and spread the wealth across what's called like this butterfly effect of segregation and economic segregation in Baltimore. Oh, there it is. Here's number 4. Look, sustainable urban development. And I should say that in this community, they had before we even did anything, before we got there, they had already come up with a vision plan where the neighbors had gotten together and they said, we want to revive this area's cultural legacy. We want older people because they stabilize the streetscape. We want to bring light and color to anchor and create a landmark. So we're responding to these existing needs. The way it works is that the residents and tenants provide funds to receive care and housing in return. That might come through Section 8 vouchers, or that might come from their own pocket. So it's mixed income. We're aligning ourselves so that it's more affordable than existing senior care options that are out there. And caregivers receive salary and equity in return for themselves and their children. I should say it's in the site in Baltimore, it's for 17 older and disabled adults, 4 caregivers and their children. The stakeholders include participants in a bajillion co-design sessions that have kind of iteratively gone on throughout this whole process. Which includes neighbors and residents, as well as people from the medical spectrum to different kinds of advocates. And there's more shared space than, everyone has their own individual space, but there's more shared space than individuals in senior care facilities normally would have. Shared meals, it's designed with universal design principles in mind, and also designed for low vision. This is something that I'm particularly interested in as someone who has early glaucoma. So this question of how do you keep those with low vision and or older and disabled adults healthy and able to like locomote and be active participants in society for as long as possible. And really, this is like if we're not including people, like if democracy is predicated on this understanding that people are participating, if we're excluding a group of people, then we don't really have a true democracy. So this is part of the tenets too. We're designing against this model of very institutional ways of thinking about care, and which includes wallpaper, which provides ways like what's called memory boxing, so you can understand where you are in the building and so forth. This is Bruce Lee, an important figure for talking about solidarity, who, united and galvanized the Latinx, Black, brown, and white communities. And
he's in Saturn.
Yeah, he's planetary. He's galactical. He's not just an earthling.
That's good.
And then I think I'll end with this picture here. Here's some of the domestic workers who've been involved in this project as a whole, which is now 12 years. And Billie Holiday, who was a domestic worker, and so was her mother, who's from Baltimore. And Oh, I guess last closing words, I'll say that, as we're doing this project, for us, it's not only, as much time as we spend designing, we're also like looking into policy. This is like a really interesting enterprise because it's like, why is care not integrating public housing? It's like, it's this policy that and legacy that we've inherited since the 1950s when these policies we inherited. So, we received this grant through MIT Washington to create this white paper, which has been circulating through Congress about how, like, my question is, what are the ways in which we can incentivize the government and private developers to create care-based co-housing? And there's some low-hanging fruit, there's some really easy solutions, and there's some more complicated things. So in the white paper, I'm seeking to lay that out. And so we had the pleasure of speaking with Bernie Sanders' housing team, for example, about that. And it feels, it's dry policy exotic.
Sounds exotic to me.
So
hey, well, let's give it up for Marisa Jahn. Yo, I guess I'm gonna start with 2 questions and then let's turn it over to our audience for some questions too. Cool. Thank you so much for that. And it's really impressive. And as much as you went through all those, it seems like 1 billion hours of work for each project. And it's, it's almost awe-inspiring. I think, particularly considering the genre you work in, as much as you work in it, it's hard for some of those artists that work alone in a studio. The genre you're in is very different. It's that, it seems almost like a hybrid of public policy meets urban community organizing meets a kind of aesthetic social interventionist project. So I have 2 points to that I'd like to ask. They're very different. One is, I hate to be so crass, but I'm sure it's on people's minds.
Yeah, sure.
Just the funding structures that allow you to participate in that and how much that shapes or your thinking or the ways in which you have to go after that. I think for those interested in that, certainly, in particular, the last project, which I'm assuming was an RFP or something, like the budget's not tiny. So just how that is orchestrated. And then the second one, which is different, which is I've always been really inspired in my class. We're talking about like Meryl Adam and Euclid or Maintenance Manifesto, but that the lens of care, talk a lot about care, but the care can also be a lens for art history. And through care, you can make a better case for art and social justice. Yeah. And it's often gendered and has bodies. So I'd like, if you don't mind, sorry, folks, I have these 2 questions. They're very different, but I'm interested in these 2 strands of thinking.
Yeah, no, so the budget question is interesting, and I'm always happy to talk about that. And I know also because, and I talk about it a lot, and sometimes when people aren't answering the question, I'm like, aren't you guys? Anyways, so yeah, so I mean, the Bill Bandito project, I should say it started off like this. I think I was like 27 and I didn't have a job. I didn't have a job at the same time. I mean, actually, I think like Blair knew me then, but I was like running a gallery off of, I don't know what, like fumes that we built it ourselves. So we had the labor. I had like a school teacher job. And then I also worked with a partner at the time, Steve Shada, and we ran a woodworking and construction business. So, the invitation was like this: hey, can you come to Honduras and do this project? And we'll raise money. One of our board members is going to have a bake sale. And so this school teacher who was at a private school in San Francisco had a bake sale, 2 bake sales, and from like selling cupcakes, got $750, which is enough for a plane ticket and like a bus ticket and like a year's worth of supplies in Honduras.
Are you serious?
Yeah. And so like,
so intense.
And then and then like library. I mean, when I say libraries put up money, I'm talking about like, so that it's like peanuts, so small, but it's like my Achilles heel because like the project is so crazy and so surreal. And it's just like, how, like there's someone who's getting married and they're having a Bill Bandito themed wedding in Honduras. It's just like how, it's just total pleasure, psychedelia. So it's not like there's really funding for it when I say, now, do I have funding for, I mean, the domestic worker project, sometimes it's like fly by the seat of your pants. Like, for example, I was doing a lot of youth programming and someone said, oh, hey, here's the executive director of Tribeca Film Festival. I was doing a lot of like audio media production. And she said, I like your work with domestic workers. I had created this audio novella app. And she said, you should apply for the Emerging Media Fund. I said, okay. So I applied, and then I got like $75,000 to make another thing, or like an extension of it in film. And she said, you're the first person to apply without a film reel. Because it was like the first year, this is back in 2013, and everyone was like filmmakers. And I just didn't know better. So I produced this film, and then I applied to ITVS, which is like a funding kind of production component of PBS. And then I produced this film, and it's a lot of goodwill. I mean, sometimes it's like me fundraising and I'm like biting my nails and like hoping the check clears back then. I mean, now I have a teaching job. I was adjuncting for a number of years, and now I have a university teaching job at Parsons. So like the Care House project is interesting because, I mean, I just had nothing to lose. And I just started talking to real estate developers, and I was like, I know I'm going to get shredded to pieces, and I need that because I want to see if I can talk their talk, and I want to see if I can get this built. And, I like bought real estate for dummies. I just talked with a lot of people at like whenever I could to just like learn. I just like picked up books and started reading the real estate section of the newspaper. But then, I mean, I feel like the only way that my project really like are able to take place is when you meet the right person. The only way that this is able to take place is because Ernst, the real estate partner, his mother was a domestic worker. As a Haitian American, he understands like the equity issues that his community faces. And so he is putting up the cash money for the brick and mortar.
So this is a private development. It's not a response to an RFP or anything like that.
It's not really, because there wouldn't be an RFP because it's like there's in policy, policy is just catching up. There's not care-based co-housing. Now I think post-pandemic, there's some other kind of initiatives taking place like this. But really it's like, we're building this and we're informing the city, and the city's like, oh, and like mayors will approach us all the time, and they're like, we're different. Like,
wait, so are you just like, you must be over, I mean, sorry, I want to get are you over the moon? This thing got built?
We're not, it has not been built. We've submitted the permits, and
okay, it's not there yet.
It opens in 2024.
I mean, this is a big deal.
It is a big deal. It's been a lot of work.
Well, congrats. I mean, that's awesome.
It's really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I really appreciate that that's happening, It also, it's going to be wild to see people living in an idea.
Yeah. I mean, I think of it like a social sculpture, And yes, Merle Euclides, here I'll segue to your second question. Merle Euclides is I mean, she's great. Like I was just thinking about, I was cleaning my studio, and I was thinking about like the making of the artwork as an event. And there's all like a ritual, right? And there's all this preparatory stuff that has to take place cleaning your studio to get to the place where you can perform that ritual, the making of the artwork that you've been really like gestating on probably for a long time. So I really love her civic commitment. I mean, it's like such a generous body of work because it's so simple, like washing the steps of the museum, this preparatory act, like shaking hands. And then it's like not overwrought, not overdetermined, and then it like resonates in so many different ways. We will always have a lot to learn from her. I didn't know exactly how to answer your question about care.
It's all right. I got you. I appreciate it. I want to turn it over to other folks. If people want to just chime in or raise your hand or whatever, love to hear from you. We've got the most generous speaker ever, Marisa. Anybody?
I just wanted to say, I think that house in Baltimore sounds amazing.
Thank you.
I go to Baltimore like probably every year, so I'm gonna definitely go out of my way to go see it.
Yeah, 2024. I'm putting the website in the chat. And if you want to read that dry policy paper, you can get it from that website.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting anyone should unless they're insomniatic.
So you said you met with Bernie Sanders. Like, are they going to do more ideas like this? Perhaps.
Well, so like
scale?
the reason why we got funding to do that policy paper was because when Biden was crafting his Build Back Better plan, there's this moment where he was seeking information from people of different kinds of expertise on how to build, reinforce the infrastructure. And what Rafi and I said was, this is a really critical, the care infrastructure is really critical. And this is a way, there's so many, there's some pretty substantial and significant ways that tweaking a letter in the code and the policy, or making an exemption, simple changes in the text would have really incredible ramifications for millions of people, and some of the most vulnerable people. So we spend summer doing this kind of research, asking the different kinds of policy or, medical experts and so forth, housing experts. We created this white paper, and then the paper's been circulated into Congress. And then we were in conversations with different kinds of people in Congress and legislature about what we were getting at. So his housing team approached us to hear from us, and we shared this with them and spoke with them and so forth. So is it the kind of thing where you oh yeah, I directly did that? No, it's the kind of thing where it's you contribute in shifting the conversation. I feel with the domestic worker body of work, which is now over 12 years in doing, 13. It's culture shifting, which can sometimes take a long time. And then there's certain moments that kind of catalyze it, like the pandemic catalyzed conversations around care, right?
That's wonderful.
It seems also, I was kind of where it's going with the care thing, but also it seems like it's a way art can get in there, because it's this, so for example, 2014, which is my class we talked about, which was the Simone Lee Free People's Medical Clinic.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting way of approaching care, health, holistic and preventative health questions, but in an environment where the art didn't make it feel so clinical. It almost kind of the art allowed a certain kind of approachability of a wholeness, and it seems in your design for this building, the art is both functional but also atmospheric, right?
Yeah.
And it seems a way, I don't know how dry and old school the Bernie folks, I bet you they're young, but I always try to find ways you can leverage art in a way that's much more visionary about the role it plays in producing civic culture. Did you see they were amenable to that, or how do you see that?
I mean, with the infrastructure bill, it's the reason, I'm going to say this. I think a critical way to know, for me in my work, I think one of the questions that really drives my work is who is my audience? And what are the common things that we agree on? And there's certain words that are going to trigger. So and then there's certain things that are non-negotiables for me. So for Care House, if you do a scan and survey of different kinds of senior facilities, it's all about the quote care consumer, which I think I push back on that term because it sounds very transactional. It's all about consumption. It's consumptive language, and it's all about the needs of the individual. And for me, it was slightly offensive when I look at that. There's never any kind of consideration about the needs of the domestic worker or the caregiver. If I'm employing a caregiver for my father, let's say, I kind of want to know that she's being well taken care of too, so I know she's doing a good job, or she's not abandoning her child and leaving her child alone. So for me, that's a non-negotiable, is to insist on the language and not only in the design, but the voices and the presence and the language, and architectural presence of centering the caregivers. Then But I will say, in something like the policy paper, my audience were people who are bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats alike. Everybody likes infrastructure. When you're talking about domestic workers' rights, that is like a leftist Democrat thing. But tax credits and infrastructure are stuff that appeals to both. So I was honing in laser focus on tax.
That's because they get to hand out the bids.
Well, because it's like, it's still just a different way of giving money. But I think it's really important to figure out more ways to create affordable housing that is amenable to care. So I'm using bipartisan language in the policy paper. And I think it's really important to know when to code switch.
Let's go. Anyone else? Come on, join in. It's a good conversation. By the way, there's
but to your question,
yeah.
I didn't really talk about art. This thing will get built. It's going to be artful. The prototype will be artful. And people are like, oh, and we weren't saying we're going to build. We were saying, here's how to spread this concept and this. If you'd like, you can build prototypes, but it doesn't have to be us building them. Just more important that they proliferate this concept.
Makes sense. By the way, Blair has a comment in there. Caring for my daughter, so off camera, but I see a lovely thread from Pond Gallery, Homa's Gallery, to Oikos to Care House.
Yeah,
Home as for art. It is incredible to see your work.
Yeah, we lived in the ceiling. Literally.
I thought your project about the copper IUD, I'm gonna go look it up. I didn't know. I didn't know all that. I just didn't but it's eye-opening, like what makes sense. The mining of the copper and the whole thing.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear a little bit about what kind of keeps pulling you towards acting upon a project. Your projects span quite a diverse range of different materials and thematics, from architecture to the IUD. And I'm just curious to hear from you, what are those underpinnings that keep bringing you back, or that makes you feel like, oh, this project is one that I really want to go forward with? Because each project is such a large scale matter that I could imagine that you might have multiple different ideas and proposals in which you're kind of trying to decide which direction to go in.
That's a really good question. So I feel like my criteria for choosing a project is there a social urgency to it? Is it something that I am uniquely poised to say something about, drawing on my background or my experiences? Does it make me laugh? This recently bought of work, like this papel picado thing, is not make me laugh. It's the first thing in a long time where I'm like, it's not funny, ha, but I'm still intrigued by it. So now I have to adjust those, because sometimes it's something is aesthetically rewarding enough to override that. And there's this question of aesthetic caliber, I think. So, I mean, if I'm doubting something, I think, well, does it relate to low-wage workers, immigrant families, youth and women? It's domestic workers, migrant workers, street vendors, and so forth. I will say the papel picado stuff, the super aesthetic stuff that I'm kind of doing that I showed first, is oftentimes doing things because the larger bodies of work are so extensive that I'm I just need to do one little thing while I'm waiting for the permits to get in. And then I'll make little works on paper. So yeah, I think it's the laughter and the joy and eye candy things that are the things that keep something alive for me.
Maybe just as we're a school of working artists, as you can probably tell. We're not, no offense to everyone here, but we're not exactly youngins, all of us. And a good thing about that is, that art is a calling that sometimes literally makes no practical sense in your life at times, but seems to keep you going. Not to be, if you can have a tempered kind of careerism about some thoughts you have, in so much as what it means to live a life that involves art, because it's not the easiest road. What are your thoughts about it, Marisa? And some thoughts for artists here. A lot of them are trying to kind of keep dreams alive while piecing their lives together, and trying to make a difference for other people, as you know well. So what are your thoughts about that right now?
Yeah. I feel like I have a couple different scattered groupings of thoughts. One is when I first had, I like making big things. Like I like big things. And then there's the question of like storing those big things. I had this like a professional development coach that came with when I got this thing called MAP Fund, which is a like kind of performing arts grant thing. And that's administered through Creative Capital. And he knew that I had a young child, and he said, well, maybe it's helpful if you think about doing film, because you really just like are sharing a file with somebody. You're not having to go to install things. That was helpful to me for a while. And it's like why I was like, yeah, I do want to do film. And then I did this PBS film, but then I like made it really complicated. I was like, oh, I'm going to have this 1957 station wagon. I'm going to drive to New York, to Florida, and see if it gets there with my child and a filmmaker. And And it made it as difficult as possible. But like in the when we actually had the thing done, yes, you can send the digital file. And then
you could have, but you sent yourself and your kid with it.
Yeah. And then I started missing big things, and so I started making more installations. What other sundry? I mean, I think I'm really trying to be really attentive to like the kind of attention that a project needs and your own creative flow. I love that book by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi called Flow. He's the guy who coined the word flow. So he talks about how the state of flow, he's like the guy who came up with this whole thing, when you can like pick it up in an airport and it's still good. And he talks about the state of flow being like it's rewarding, and it's so rewarding that a critical question that he points out is like how to get yourself into the state of flow. So for me, if I'm writing, like when I was writing this last book, or if I'm filmmaking, and this is to me like editing or like shooting, they require such like attentive maximal presence that I'll wake up at 4 a.m. and make stuff for like 3.5 hours. I make my coffee the night before, because the reason why I say 7:30 is because my son wakes up at 7:30. And then if I have that done, then I'm like done for the day, and I'm just like preparing for that moment of like production in the way that like if I'm writing when I'm writing, so I think like being really attentive to what are the conditions that enable you to get into that flow and maximizing. And that's like when you really are efficient, that to me is super important. And that like will affect your professional life. Like I told my dean where I work, I said, listen, I also think for other people, like I structure my class so it's 10 days straight, because I think that's how people are going to learn. You have the highest learning curve, and that's when I'm going to be the best teacher. I'm not going to be your best teacher if I'm like spreading this thing out and dragging it out. That's just me.
Flow, I already ordered it while you're saying it.
Nice.
I'm a big believer of flow. Mine's after the coffee sinks in. I got a 2.5 hour window in the morning where everything happens, and then it's done. And it's over. Anybody else chime in? This is so awesome. Cheryl, come on. Anything about real estate?
See, NATO, why you go there? No, I mean, I found it all like really interesting. And I think that, I think there's always something that is great about an artist lens or an outsider lens on like those kind of big policy issues, and I feel like you did a really great job, Marisa, with like the Care House in Baltimore. I think on a personal level, I was super intrigued by the library project and like the whole bandit you made, because, to see the way that kind of caught hold and like really inspired children and their families was like personally really satisfying to me. Nato knows I'm like artist and city planner. That's my day job. So that's why he called me out. So I am beyond jaded on public policy and housing issues, but I applaud you.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks for that on all fronts. It's true. Is it true that the bandito of books is more popular than Santa Claus in Honduras? Dude, that's so intense. That is really next level.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, if you could say more though about, I think it's along the lines of flow, the balance of like keeping your artistic practice going in the face of like teaching responsibilities, family responsibilities, so sort of the other side of what NATO was asking about, those of us who are wearing many hats in addition to our art careers.
Yeah, how do you wear many hats? And also, so like, so this is a question of making sure you don't burn out, which also is like related to the other question of how you keep a project going. I will say that a critical, I said a variant of this before, but I think a critical thing for me is I learned that a project will only be worth it for me in the community if there is a main contact who believes in the importance of creativity, because I will not convince someone, I don't want to waste my time convincing someone. They already have to have recognized that. It's like, I'm not sure you can convince someone. Someone has to be like, know that they want that. Like, I don't work well with people who don't have a sense of humor. I don't work well with people who are super negative. And also it has to be someone who's like, oh yeah, we need creativity to make this thing work. So, and that's like community organizers who come to me and they're like, we're trying to pass a domestic worker bill of rights in Connecticut. Can we collaborate? Or, this librarian in Saskatchewan, Canada, who was like, hey, we want to adapt the bandito so he rides in on a buffalo, like Plains Indians. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds super fascinating. So it's like, that to me is what also keeps me refreshed and keeps me going. And then it's like an efficient use of resources. And it's like their leadership is involved, yeah. And then like work-life balance, wearing many hats. I think like having people who are like invigorate you as like cohorts. And there's going to be like, there's nothing like, if you have a boss, there's nothing like having a good boss. I have a dean, an awesome dean where I work. That's great. I have really great collaborators, I feel, and that keeps me going.
I really appreciate that. I do think the message, which I've really taken from that too, is try to surround yourself with good energy and protect yourself emotionally.
Yeah.
Especially because you deal with such difficult issues. I think like sometimes you almost have to protect yourself to keep working on the hard issues.
I think so.
Right?
I think so. I think it's also myself and also other people, because I feel like, they can go to like a trauma mental wellness person to talk about that. But like the role that I can play as me and as an artist is through the lens of joy and creativity, which confers dignity And I think there's a lot of humanity when people like are talking about the animal sculptures, you know what I mean? Or like in their public housing buildings, you know? Yeah.
I want everyone to give it up for Marisa Morán Jahn. John. Hey, thank you, Marisa. It's so awesome to have you with us. I want to remind everyone we have summer courses out. Please sign up. Get in touch with us if you have any questions. Take a look. We love having all of you at the school, whether you're from our newsletter, or attending, or used to attend, or still attending, or whatever. Welcome and thank you for joining us at the Alternative Arts School. Marisa, love to talk to you again. Good to see you. Thanks everyone for joining.